Hello and welcome to another episode of Unboxing the Trends. My name is Tim Ranagan, your host, and I've got with me again today Lori Boyer, the host of the Unboxing Logistics podcast. Lori, how you doing today?
I'm doing so good, and I just want to say, great job pronouncing my name. I have to speak on a lot of webinars and stuff, and people always, apparently I've got a hard name, Lori Boyer. I don't know, but you did
I,
perfect. I loved
I
it.
appreciate that. I appreciate the vote of confidence. Lori, we're going to talk about trends again this month.
Again.
July didn't bring up some huge headlines, right? But I'm just curious. You mentioned that it revealed a lot. So I'd love to get your thoughts on what trends are kind of quietly making their way through the month.
Yeah, July kind of flew under the radar a little bit, Tim, but I think for those people who are paying attention, there are some trends, some kind of things under the surface that are building. Um, there's two things specifically that I really want to touch on today as trends that I'm kind of keeping my eye on. We had our latest data come out around warehouse jobs, and that was really interesting. Our labor, we've actually had some dropping there, and so I want to get into that. That's one thing. Warehouse labor is something I'm keeping an eye on, and the other thing are kind of our carrier volumes. So we're moving towards peak. July's done. July is to me like the very beginning of kind of looking at some forecasting stuff.
It's like that tip of the iceberg, right?
Exactly, where companies start making some shifts and some changes, and so while there was nothing huge in the headlines, underneath, if you looked, there were just sort of some bubbling issues with both, warehouse labor and with our carriers, so those are kind of the 2 things that I'd love to talk about.
Awesome. Well, let's dive into warehouse labor a little bit. So we talked about this a little bit in last month's episode of Unboxing the Trends, but I'm curious, how serious is this labor conversation as we head into peak, right? We kind of talked about it leading up the first, 2 quarters of the year. I'm sure we have a lot of listeners out there that are wondering what this could or how this could impact us as we head into peak.
Yeah, absolutely, so I think it's a little bit more concerning than I had thought previously. Typically, as we hit about July, from July through November, and these numbers change a little bit, but typically we see about 10 to 15,000 additional warehouse jobs open up to get us all through peak. In July, we actually lost almost 6,500 warehouse jobs. Um, Quite a big contraction. We actually have our lowest number of total warehouse roles right now since COVID, since the early days of COVID, really, when a lot of people had to go home. That's to me a big red flag about in a couple of different ways. Um, it really shows that people are concerned about the seasonal ramp isn't quite materializing the way that maybe we anticipated. So some of these larger companies are kind of betting on maybe volume is going to be lower, and that maybe it's a little riskier than some of our signs have shown in terms of what the predictions and the forecasts across the board are for consumer demand through peak. That being said, you know, again, our consumer demand, our consumer confidence is low. We're still seeing a lot of purchases being made. So that does raise the point that if we do get a good volume, or when we hit some of those micro surges that we talk about, when you get a big volume spike, warehouses may not be able to handle them quite as well as they would in a normal year. When they're understaffed, everything just slows down. Orders are gonna take longer to get picked, packed, out the door. That just kinda creates a ripple effect when it comes to deadlines and, really just makes everything a little bit more difficult. So, yeah, if I were a shipper right now, I'd be paying very close attention to what's going on in the warehouse.
Okay, great. So let's dive into the warehouse a little bit, right? Easy Post, we work with a lot of 3PLs, so we kind of hear feedback from that side of the warehouse. What does this mean for the 3PLs? What does this mean for internal fulfillment operations? Can you dive into that a little bit as well, Lori?
Yeah, sure. So For me, again, if you're a shipper and you rely on a 3PL, or even if you have your own internal, fulfillment ops, this means that you shouldn't assume that your partners are gonna be 100% ready for peak. 3PLs, they're great, and they're amazing, and we work with them all the time, you said, but, um, since what the numbers show is that warehouse staffing is down, um, just communicate. Find out, how are you staffing up? What's your plan if my demand spikes? Are you using automation? That's another point here is it could be, and we don't have the data on this, it could be that a lot of warehouses are simply implementing more automation. And so they don't need as many workers. So maybe that's the case with your 3PL. Maybe they're just using automation. And obviously, if you yourself, if you're running your own warehouse, your own fulfillment centers, just look for potential choke points always. Look at your process now. If you are cutting back on workers, or you're thinking, just make some contingency plans for what you do when volumes spike. I'm going to say when, Tim, because everybody's going to get some good volume at some point this peak.
I love that. I love that recommendation, Lori. Communication is key, especially as we head into peak season. No matter where you're at in your supply chain, reach out to those who are involved, especially when you get into these fulfillment centers. Because as we head into peak, as Lori mentioned, when that volume ramps up, you're going to want to make sure that you have plans in place and the contingency plan in place in case things get bottlenecked.
That's exactly right on the nose there, Tim. And so, yeah, communicate, reach out, talk to them. What are you doing? What's going on? What are the plans? And make sure you have those plans in place.
Awesome. Love that. Okay. So we've talked about fulfillment center. Let's talk about that last mile stretch. Lori, what's going on with carriers as we head into peak, specifically UPS, FedEx, USPS? Is there anything that shippers need to be paying close attention to as we head into this last couple quarters of the year?
So, there were some interesting signs again. Carriers I've actually really been diving into lately. I'm such a nerd, Tim, but on like the trends decade over decade is because we're starting to see a lot of signals of carriers. There's some stuff going on in the carrier landscape in general, that is a change. And so, yeah, this is a shout out for some upcoming webinars and stuff, but I will be diving into carriers in great depth and what's happening. So keep an eye out for that. But in July, we did see some additional numbers pop up around our carriers, especially our big carriers. Let me see if I can find the numbers. So we saw July of this year to July of last year a 7.3% decrease in the US domestic package volume through that. That's a lot bigger jump than we usually see. It's a lot bigger than last year's dip. We had a dip last year. We had a dip the year before that. We're having a multi-year downward trend. Um, to put that in perspective, before the pandemic, before all that, we typically saw, and what's typical in July would be a 3 to 5% growth over that time. So we're actually again seeing fewer packages going out. So that's what happens when consumer demand is soft. So again, this is a little bit of a signal about demand being a little bit down, especially when it comes to kind of e-commerce stuff. So carriers are trying to protect their margins. So we've seen in the last month or so, FedEx is consolidating its network. It's been cutting staff. Again, with the talking about those warehouse numbers. USPS just raised their rates again. And some of these are big jumps, Tim. Like, I'm gonna look at my number here. Medium flat rate box, for example, one of the most popular, most used is went up over 11%. It's a big jump on some of these rates. So we're kind of seeing a shift as carriers are really trying to get their balance lines in order. Um, eh, so they really are focusing all their time on their biggest, maybe their most profitable customers, getting all the deals there. So if you are especially a mid-size, or really if you're a small size carrier, this is probably not the strongest time for you to be working with the big carriers solely. Um, Always I recommend diversifying. I would recommend that for everyone. You shouldn't ever have a single carrier. But especially right now when those kind of big carriers are not necessarily the most affordable, we're just seeing really large fees racking up there. You may want to look at, a lot of our customers. Again, we are, as I like to say, we're carrier agnostic. We love all our carriers, and we work with hundreds. So, um, but there are regional carriers. There may be last mile carriers. There can be some really specific kind of hybrid options you can use. I always recommend using, if you're an Easy Post customer right now listening, please look at Luma. Luma is the AI tool that helps you compare all the different rates. If you are a small shipper, it's totally free. Above that, there's a little bit of a fee, but you can really dig into the data and figure out which carriers might be the best for different routes, for different zones, if you're urban versus rural. So you can look at your rate shopping. I would rate shop in real time. That's another big one, is as we move through peak, and what we're seeing is sometimes those fees and stuff change really fast. So make sure you're constantly keeping an eye on it and just watch the performance data. So as some of these carriers are downsizing or cutting staff, make sure that your SLAs, your service level agreements, are being met. And if that starts to slip, you're going to want to be able to shift really fast.
Yeah, I love those recommendations, Lori. I want to kind of summarize a few of the things that you just suggested because they're really important recommendations for our listeners. As we head into peak season, remember, communication is key. Doesn't matter if you're communicating with your fulfillment network or with your carrier contracts, right? However you manage your carrier relationships, just remember that even if you're a small shipper, you can diversify your carrier network so that when some of these issues pop up that Lori just mentioned with our carriers happening this year, that you have a plan in place, some contingencies in place, other methods that you can get your products out to your customers. So wonderful recommendations, Lori. Obviously, Easy Post is a tremendous resource for you, but just our general recommendation for our listeners, whether you're an Easy Post customer or not, diversify, diversify, diversify. It's the number one issue that we see in our industry, and it really, really can support you, especially as we head into peak season. There's still plenty of time to get out ahead of some of these bottlenecks that you may face.
Well, especially I think, Tim, as we are potentially facing a little bit of a downturn and a potentially soft peak season, in shipping, those are costs that can be saved. So there are opportunities to save a lot of money by shifting some of your volume to different carriers. And so, yeah, we may not be able to increase the number of packages going out, but you can definitely decrease the cost that you've got going, um, sending out to your carrier network. So just definitely keep an eye on that. I completely agree with that communication. Your list was fabulous. It was exactly right. You need to communicate, you need to diversify, keep an eye on what's going on, and really this peak season, it's a peak season of uncertainty and a little bit of challenge. You've got to be ready to pivot and be able to make changes kind of on the fly.
Last question for you, Lori. We do this every peak season, but I'm just curious to get your opinion. As we head into peak 2025, I'm sure our listeners are like, what's Lori Boyer's number one recommendation of things that she's learned from past years, data that you may have accumulated? What is your number one recommendation, the biggest advice you can offer to shippers as we head into peak?
Okay, so heading into peak right now, I think that the best thing you can do is to examine your systems now before you're moving into peak. So you've got a little bit of time. We're August. Oh my goodness, it's August already, Tim. We're already seeing, the latest data shows the majority of people start their holiday shopping well before Halloween. So we're right there. We're right on the precipice. Don't assume that everything's just going to go according to plan. Assume the opposite. Find the Boy Scout motto to be prepared and try to run through those scenarios. Figure out maybe where you can save a dollar or a penny or something, and that's really going to add up for you. And just take your time to make sure that you're looking at and have visibility and understand what's going on.
Wonderful recommendations, Lori. Well, thank you, Lori, for all of your thoughts and opinions. You've shared a lot of great information. These definitely were some of the more quiet trends that have kind of permeated throughout July. And to our listeners, this has been another episode of Unboxing the Trends from EasyPost. If you would like to get involved, please make sure you like and subscribe to our content. If you'd like to see more content from Lori across our podcast network, make sure you visit us at easypost.com/podcasts. Until next month.
We'll see you later.